Could you face the past when it suddenly stands before you, stronger and braver than ever? When Ms. Love's life is saved by a soldier, she never expected to see a familiar face from her past, a face that could change everything. Ms. Love, a stunning woman in her early 30s, drove along the scenic road in her sleek, black car. She was dressed elegantly in a navy blue evening gown, her makeup perfect, her hair styled neatly. Everything about her screamed sophistication. She was heading to an exclusive evening event in a nearby state, an event she had been looking forward to for weeks. Ms. Love was not just any woman. She was a well-known hotelier, owning a chain of luxury hotels. She had built her empire with sheer determination and hard work, and she was proud of her success. As she drove, she hummed softly to herself, feeling a sense of satisfaction. She loved her life. The attention, the admiration, the power. Yet beneath all that elegance and confidence, there was something else, something hidden. Ms. Love had always been cautious about love and relationships. She carried deep-seated fears that stemmed from her upbringing, fears that she rarely talked about. Tonight, however, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was focused on arriving at the event and making a grand entrance, as she always did. The highway was mostly empty, with only a few cars passing by occasionally. Ms. Love enjoyed the peace and solitude, the smoothness of the road, and the way her car glided effortlessly across the asphalt. She was about halfway to her destination when she approached a sharp bend. It was a turn she had taken many times before, and she knew it well. But this time, something went wrong. As she took the bend, her car suddenly skidded, the tires losing grip on the road. Ms. Love's heart raced as she tried to regain control, but the car veered sharply to the side. The vehicle slid off the road, the wheels bumping over the uneven ground until it hit a ditch. Ms. Love barely had time to react before the car jerked to a stop, wedged tightly into the ditch, and then disaster struck. The engine made a loud, sputtering noise, and smoke began to pour out from under the hood. Panic surged through Ms. Love as she realized something was terribly wrong. She tried to unbuckle her seatbelt, but her hands were shaking, and her fingers fumbled with the latch. The smoke thickened, and then she saw it, a flicker of flames near the engine. Her car was on fire. No, 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 she gasped, struggling to free herself. She tugged desperately at the seatbelt, her mind racing. She was trapped, and the flames were growing. The smoke filled the car, making it hard to breathe, and she felt a wave of fear like she had never experienced before. Her eyes stung, and her throat burned as she coughed, trying to call out for help, even though she knew there was no one around to hear her. For a few agonizing seconds, it felt like all hope was lost. The flames crept closer, and she could feel the heat against her skin. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst, when suddenly she heard a distant sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. A rumble, like the sound of engines approaching. She opened her eyes and squinted through the smoke, barely able to make out the shape of military vehicles coming down the road. A convoy of soldiers appeared over the hill, their dark green trucks moving swiftly. Ms. Love could hardly believe it. It was as if help had arrived out of nowhere, just when she needed it the most. The convoy screeched to a halt, and within seconds, a group of soldiers jumped out, quickly assessing the situation. One of them, a tall man with a strong, commanding presence, Matthew, ran straight toward her burning car. Matthew shouted commands to his fellow soldiers, who immediately sprang into action, grabbing fire extinguishers and preparing to douse the flames. Without hesitating, he rushed to the driver's side door and peered inside, his eyes locking onto Ms. Love's terrified face. "Stay calm, Ma'am. I'm going to get you out of here," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Ms. Love could barely speak, her chest tight with fear, but she nodded. Matthew pulled at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. He didn't waste a second. He signaled for one of the other soldiers to bring a tool, and within moments he managed to pry the door open. The flames were dangerously close, but Matthew didn't flinch. He leaned in, unbuckled her seatbelt, and carefully pulled her out of the car, carrying her away from the smoke and heat. As they moved away, the other soldiers quickly put out the fire, the hissing sound of the extinguishers filling the air. Ms. Love could hardly believe what had just happened. She had been moments away from disaster, and now she was lying on the side of the road, gasping for air, saved by a group of soldiers she had never met. She looked up at Matthew, who was kneeling beside her, checking her for injuries. "You're safe now," he said softly, his dark eyes calm and focused. "The fire is out, and you're going to be okay." Ms. Love managed to whisper a shaky thank you, still trying to process everything. She looked at Matthew's face, trying to memorize the features of the man who had saved her life. There was something familiar about him, but she was too dazed to figure out what it was. All she knew was that she was grateful, and she had never felt so relieved. Matthew, on the other hand, recognized her immediately. Even through the soot and panic, he knew exactly who she was. But he said nothing, choosing to remain professional. This wasn't the time to bring up the past, not when Ms. Love was still recovering from the shock. As the medics arrived and began to examine her, Matthew stepped back, his mind racing with memories of a time long ago, memories of a young woman he had once loved. As Ms. Love was taken to a safer spot to catch her breath, she couldn't help but glance back at the soldier who had saved her. She felt a strange connection, a nagging feeling that she knew him, but she couldn't place it. For now, all she could do was watch as the soldiers packed up, the flames fully extinguished, and wonder why the face of her rescuer seemed to stir something deep within her heart. The air was cool, and the last rays of sunlight were fading as Ms. Love sat on the side of the road, wrapped in a blanket that one of the soldiers had given her. She was still trembling slightly, the adrenaline from the accident slowly wearing off, leaving her exhausted and confused. Her mind was reeling from everything that had just happened: the skid, the fire, and the sudden appearance of a group of soldiers who had saved her life. But more than anything, she was thinking about the man who had pulled her from the burning car, the soldier who seemed so calm and strong in the chaos. She looked around, trying to spot him. The soldiers were moving around quickly, making sure everything was under control and packing up their gear. A few feet away, she saw Matthew, the soldier who had rescued her, standing with his back to her, speaking to one of his team members. For some reason, she couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something about him that felt familiar, yet she couldn't quite place it. She found herself studying his posture, the way he carried himself, and even the tone of his voice as he gave instructions. It was strange, but she felt like she knew him. A medic walked over to her, interrupting her thoughts. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" he asked gently. "Any pain or discomfort?" Ms. Love shook her head. "I'm okay," she said, her voice still shaky. "Just a little shaken up." "That's understandable," the medic replied, offering a reassuring smile. "You were very lucky that our convoy happened to be passing by. The fire could have gotten much worse if they hadn't acted so quickly." Ms. Love nodded, still processing everything. "Yes, I'm very grateful," she said, her eyes drifting back to Matthew. The medic followed her gaze and smiled. "That's Sergeant Matthew," he said. "He was the one who got you out. We're lucky to have him. He's one of the best." Hearing his name made something click in Ms. Love's mind. "Matthew," she repeated softly, her heart suddenly beating faster. She hadn't heard that name in years, but it was a name she could never forget. She felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her, mixed with a sudden sense of disbelief. Could it really be him? As if he could feel her gaze, Matthew turned around, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and the world seemed to stand still. There was a brief flash of recognition in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself, walking over to her with a calm, professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I'm glad to see you're okay," he said, his voice steady. "We managed to get the fire under control, and it looks like there's no serious damage to you." Ms. Love's mind was racing. She looked at his face, searching for confirmation of what her heart was telling her. The strong jawline, the deep brown eyes, the calm yet confident presence. It all matched the image she had of a young man from her past, a man she thought she would never see again. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" Matthew's expression softened, and he gave her a small, bittersweet smile. "Yes, Ms. Love, it's me," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Ms. Love's heart skipped a beat. She could hardly believe it. Standing before her was the same Matthew she had known all those years ago, but he was different now. The young, kind-hearted student she remembered had grown into a strong, confident soldier. She felt a mix of emotions: relief, surprise, and a strange sense of nostalgia. I can't believe it," she stammered, struggling to find the right words. How did you end up here?" Matthew hesitated for a moment, as if considering how much he should say. After I left, I decided to join the military," he said simply. "I wanted to see the world, and I needed a change. I went overseas for training, and I've been with the Special Forces for a few years now. We were on a mission nearby when we saw your car." There was so much left unsaid between them, and Ms. Love could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. She wanted to ask him everything: where he had been, what he had done, and why he had decided to join the military. But she didn't know where to start. Instead, she just nodded, still trying to process the fact that he was standing right in front of her. I'm so glad you were here," she said softly, her eyes filling with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." Matthew's expression softened, and for a moment, the professionalism faded, revealing a hint of the warmth she remembered. "I'm glad I was here too," he said, his voice gentle. "I never thought I'd see you again, let alone under these circumstances." Ms. Love looked down at her hands, feeling a pang of guilt and regret. She remembered how things had ended between them years ago. Matthew had been her first love, but she had been too scared to commit, too focused on her career and her fears of marriage to let herself be vulnerable. She had chosen to walk away, even though she knew it hurt him deeply. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "For everything. For how things ended. I didn't know you were. I didn't expect." She trailed off, not knowing how to finish. Matthew was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. "It's okay, Ms. Love," he said. "That was a long time ago. We were both young, and we had our own paths to follow. I don't hold anything against you." Ms. Love felt a lump in her throat, but she managed a small smile. "You've changed so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're different." "So are you," Matthew replied, his eyes meeting hers with a gentle gaze. "But that doesn't mean we can't find a way to reconnect. We may be different people now, but maybe there's still a chance to understand each other." As the convoy prepared to move out, Ms. Love realized how much she still wanted to know about the man who had saved her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, despite everything, there was still a chance for something more between them. As the evening sky darkened, casting a cool twilight over the scene, Ms. Love found herself sitting in a temporary tent the soldiers had set up by the roadside. The medics had made sure she was stable, and the car fire was now nothing but a smoldering shell. Yet, as the physical chaos settled, the emotional storm inside her was only beginning to stir. She still couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that Matthew, the man who had pulled her from the burning car, was the same person she had known years ago, her first love, the man she thought she'd never see again. The soldiers had done their best to make her comfortable while she waited for a tow truck to retrieve her vehicle. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she watched Matthew talking to his team, giving orders. He was calm, composed, and authoritative. He was so different from the young man she remembered, yet in some ways, he was exactly the same. She kept replaying their brief conversation over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of how this reunion could be real. After a while, she noticed that Matthew was walking back toward her, his helmet tucked under his arm. As he approached, she felt her heart begin to race. She had so many questions, and she didn't know where to start. He sat down across from her, maintaining a respectful distance, but his eyes were soft, as if he understood everything she was feeling. "Your car should be towed shortly," he said, breaking the silence, "and we'll make sure you have a safe ride to wherever you need to go." His tone was professional, but there was a warmth beneath it, a familiarity that made her heart ache. "Thank you," Ms. Love said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then added, "Matthew, I still can't believe it's you. After all these years, I never thought I'd see you again, and certainly not like this." Matthew nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know. I didn't expect this either," he said. "But life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Ms. Love couldn't help but smile at the understatement. Surprising was an understatement for how she felt. She had spent years building her life, trying to control every aspect of it. She had a successful business, wealth, and influence, but seeing Matthew again reminded her of a time when things were simpler and she was not so guarded. She remembered their time together as undergraduates, the way they'd sit on campus lawns, talking for hours about their dreams. Matthew had always been ambitious, despite his modest background. He was intelligent, kind, and had a quiet strength that drew her to him. But he was also poor, and at the time, she had been too focused on what she thought she should want: a glamorous career, financial security, and freedom, to appreciate what she had with him. The memories came flooding back, and she felt a pang of regret. "I heard you joined the military," she said, trying to find a way to continue the conversation. "But I never knew you became a Special Forces soldier." Matthew smiled faintly. "After we parted ways, I needed a change," he said. "I graduated with good grades, but finding a job wasn't easy. My uncle had been so generous, putting me through school, but I wanted to stand on my own. The military seemed like a way to do that, and I've always been drawn to serving others. So I signed up, went through training, and before I knew it, I was sent overseas. I guess you could say it became my life." He paused, studying her expression. "I didn't expect to run into you like this. The last time we spoke, you made it pretty clear that you were moving on, focusing on other things." Ms. Love felt her cheeks flush, a mix of embarrassment and sadness washing over her. She had indeed told him that years ago. She remembered the conversation vividly. It was just after their graduation. Matthew had asked her to consider building a future together, to take a chance on him even though he didn't have much to offer at the time. But she was scared. Scared of love, scared of marriage, scared of the kind of life she thought she might be destined for if she chose to stay with someone without the wealth and security she was used to. So she had said no, and in doing so, she had closed the door on what could have been a beautiful future. "I was so foolish," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I needed to follow a certain path to be happy, but I didn't realize I was pushing away the one person who truly cared about me." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Matthew, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for how I hurt you." Matthew's eyes softened, and he took a deep breath. "It was a long time ago, Ms. Love," he said gently. "We were young, and we were both trying to figure out our lives. I don't blame you for the choices you made." "But I do," she said, her voice firm. "I blame myself. I was so afraid of settling down, of opening my heart, that I let you go. And seeing you here now, knowing that you risked your life to save me, it makes me realize how wrong I was." Matthew was quiet for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Then he reached out, hesitating for just a moment before placing a hand on her arm. "I understand, Ms. Love," he said softly. "But I also understand fear. I was scared too. scared that I wasn't enough for you, scared that I couldn't give you the life you wanted. I guess we both had our reasons." Ms. Love felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't bother to wipe it away. "I wish I could go back and change things," she said. "I wish I could have been braver, like you." Matthew smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that reminded her of the boy she once knew. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can decide where we go from here." Ms. Love felt a flicker of hope stir in her chest. It was a fragile, tentative feeling, but it was there. "Then maybe we can start over?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Not as the people we were, but as who we are now." Matthew's smile widened, and he nodded. "Maybe we can," he said. "I'd like that." For the first time that night, Ms. Love felt like she was breathing easily. She didn't know what the future held, but as she sat there with Matthew, she knew she wanted to find out. And this time, she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way. The soldiers had finished their tasks, and the convoy was almost ready to depart. The roadside was no longer bustling with activity, and there was a peaceful quietness that settled over the area. Most of the soldiers were packing up, preparing to continue their mission, but Matthew stayed behind, still seated across from Ms. Love. The flickering of the emergency lights from the military vehicles cast a soft glow, giving their surroundings an almost dreamlike quality. Ms. Love felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: relief from surviving the accident, confusion at seeing Matthew again after so many years, and a strange sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew that their brief reunion had brought back memories she had long buried, and she didn't want to leave without addressing them. The sight of Matthew, now a strong and confident soldier, made her realize just how much time had passed and how different their lives had become. Yet there was still a connection between them, a link that hadn't been severed by distance or time. The convoy was nearly ready to move out, and one of the soldiers approached Matthew to confirm that they were good to go. Matthew nodded but asked them to give him a few more minutes. He then turned back to Ms. Love, his eyes searching hers. "I'm glad we had a chance to talk," he said softly, breaking the silence. "But I think there's still more to say, isn't there?" Ms. Love felt her heart skip a beat. She nodded, knowing he was right. "Yes, there is," she replied, her voice gentle. "Matthew, I never got a chance to explain back then why I made the decisions I did. And I think you deserve to know the truth." She hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had spent years trying to forget the pain of their breakup, telling herself that it was for the best, that she had made the right choice. But now, face to face with Matthew, she realized that those feelings had never truly disappeared. "When we were in college," she began, "I was so scared. Scared of letting someone in, scared of being vulnerable, and most of all, scared of marriage. Growing up, I watched my parents' marriage fall apart. They were both so focused on their own lives and careers that they drifted away from each other, and it was painful to see. I think I was afraid that if I let myself fall in love, I'd end up the same way." Matthew listened intently, his expression softening. "I understand," he said quietly, "but you never told me that. You just left." Ms. Love lowered her gaze, her eyes brimming with regret. "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't have the courage to be honest with you back then. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only hurting both of us. I was so focused on building my career, on proving to everyone that I could be successful on my own, that I pushed you away. And by the time I realized what I had done, it was too late." Matthew's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently touch her hand. "You weren't the only one who was scared," he said. "I was scared too. Scared that I wasn't good enough for you, that I couldn't give you the life you wanted. When you said you wanted to focus on your career, I thought, maybe I was just holding you back." Ms. Love felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't bother to wipe it away. "You were never holding me back, Matthew," she said, her voice trembling. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't realize it back then. I was too caught up in my fears, and I let them control me. Matthew took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. I always wondered what would have happened if things had been different, he said. But I don't blame you, Ms. Love. We were both trying to figure out our lives. I went overseas, joined the military, and focused on building my career too. I thought it would help me move on, and in a way it did. But I never forgot about you. Those words struck Ms. Love deeply. She had spent so many years convincing herself that Matthew had moved on, that he had forgotten her, and yet here he was, admitting that she had never left his thoughts. I never forgot about you either, she whispered. I tried to, but it never worked. Even when I was at the peak of my success, there was always something missing. And now I see that it was you. Matthew's expression softened, and he smiled, a warm and gentle smile that reminded her of the boy she had once known. We can't change the past, Ms. Love, he said. But maybe we can change what happens next. Maybe we can start over, not as the people we were back then, but as who we are now. Ms. Love felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. She had spent so much time running from her fears, but maybe, just maybe, she could face them now. I'd like that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to find out. And I want to find out with you. Matthew's smile widened, and he nodded. Then let's take it one step at a time, he said. We don't have to figure everything out right now. But we can start by getting to know each other again, by spending time together and seeing where this leads. The convoy was ready to leave, and the soldiers were beginning to pack up. Matthew glanced over at them, then back at Ms. Love. I have to go now, but I'll be back. And when I come back, we'll have that dinner you mentioned. Just you and me, no interruptions. Ms. Love felt a warmth spread through her chest, and she smiled, a genuine smile that she hadn't felt in a long time. I'll be waiting, she said, and this time, I won't run away. Matthew stood up, and as he prepared to leave, he gave her hand one last gentle squeeze. Take care, Ms. Love, he said softly. I'll see you soon. As he walked away, Ms. Love watched him go, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. She was ready to take a chance, to open her heart, and to see where this unexpected reunion would lead. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story of unexpected reunions and second chances. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past in an unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming tales to life. See you next time.